Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I make my weekly bread loaves. This recipe is very easy to follow. You only need a handful of ingredients, and I bet you in no time you'll be making your own soft and fluffy bread. To get started, I'm going to start by showing you how to measure your ingredients. First, I'm starting with the flour. This is the exact brand I use. This flour has a higher protein content, which is why I like it, but you can use any brand of bread flour you like. If you're using a measuring cup, this is how I recommend you measure your flour. So use another cup to sprinkle the flour into the measuring cup and then level with a knife. If you want to get the most accurate measurement, especially for this recipe, then I recommend you use a kitchen scale. This is what I use for most of my baking recipes to get the most accurate measurement every time. After measuring the flour, I'll go ahead and measure the other ingredients. The next thing I'll measure is the water. Of course, you can use your liquid measuring cup for this, but like I mentioned earlier, I just like to use my kitchen scale because it saves more time and it's also more accurate. I'll go ahead and measure all the other ingredients and then set that aside. Next, I'll gather all my measured ingredients. So here I have the flour, yeast, sugar. I'll be using some powdered milk, a little bit of salt, some unsalted butter, some room temperature water, and a little oil. I'll start by adding the water to my mixer. Next, I'm going to add the yeast. I'm using instant yeast for this, and this is the exact brand I use. You can also get this in the sachet form, and you're going to use about 1 sachet for this recipe. The yeast is one of the most important ingredients when making bread because that is what is going to make your bread rise. So before you start, make sure you check the expiration date of your yeast to make sure it's still good. If you're not sure of the yeast you're using, you can do the simple test to make sure that the yeast is alive and well. To proof the yeast, add the yeast and a little bit of sugar to a cup or bowl. Add some lukewarm water. The water should be around 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can check the temperature of the water using a food thermometer. If you don't have a food thermometer, you can test this by dipping a clean finger into the water. The water should be around the same temperature as your body temperature. Allow the mixture sit for about 10 minutes. You can cover it to make this process a bit faster. After about 10 minutes, the yeast mixture should have bloomed like this, and that's how you know the yeast is good to use. If the yeast doesn't bloom at all, the yeast is most likely bad. Throw it away and start again with a new yeast. If you trust the yeast you're using, you don't have to do that test. Just go ahead and mix the yeast with room temperature water and then add the other ingredients. I've added all the bread ingredients except the butter. Next, I'm going to attach my dough attachment for my mixer, and I'm going to mix this for about 2 minutes. I'll start by mixing with the lowest setting just so the ingredients don't start flying around. I'll mix this on the stir setting for about 2 minutes, and I'm using my KitchenAid stand mixer for this. You can also knead with your hands if you don't have a stand mixer yet. I show how to do this in my sandwich video that I posted a little while back. Once the dough starts to come together, increase the speed and continue kneading this for about 4 minutes. The dough may look a bit hard at this stage, but that's just because I haven't added the butter. And I'm adding the butter last because I want the dough to develop enough gluten, and butter actually limits that gluten development. After mixing for about 4 minutes, when the dough is really nice and stretchy, I'm going to go ahead and add the butter. I'll continue mixing this until everything comes together. You want to mix on slow speed at first after adding the butter, and then after about 1 minute or so, increase the speed until the dough comes together. A simple way to know that the dough is ready is when the sides of the bowl starts to be clean and it starts to form a dough ball. Another way to know is by stretching out the dough. So this is what the dough looked like when I just started. And after a few more minutes of kneading, I'm going to show you what the dough is supposed to look like when you stretch it out. I kneaded the bread dough for about 8 minutes in total, so 2 minutes for mixing the ingredients, 4 minutes before adding the butter, and another 2 to 3 minutes after adding the butter. I'm going to carefully stretch out the dough again just so you see how it looks like after kneading. This is called the window pane test, and it's just to see how strong and elastic the dough is. Traditionally, you are supposed to roll the dough out in front of a window and roll it out thin enough that light can pass through it without the dough tearing. Now I'm sure my dough is well kneaded. I'm going to take it out. I'm going to roll this up to form a dough ball, and then I'm going to put this in a clean white bowl and I'm going to allow it to rise. I'm going to let this rise for about 2 hours. The rising time really depends on the climate where you are. So if you're in a warmer environment, it will take a shorter time to rise, and if you're in a colder environment, it will take a longer time. To help it rise faster, you can wrap in plastic wrap, cover with a clean kitchen towel, and place in a warm environment like a turned off oven or a microwave. Also, make sure that the oven or microwave wasn't recently used because that may be too warm for the dough. After about 1 to 2 hours, your dough should have doubled in size. I'm going to gently deflate it to get all the trapped air out. Next step is to shape into loaves, so I'm going to transfer this to my cutting board and divide this into 3 equal pieces. To get perfectly equal dough, weigh the entire dough, divide the figure you get into 3 and then cut accordingly. Next, get your pans ready. If the pans are dirty, you can clean it by using a tiny amount of the dough. The dough works like a magnet to get rid of any breadcrumbs that may be left from the last time you baked. And the pans I'm using are 8 by 4 inches. I'm going to provide a link for the pan in the description box, as well as most of the other equipment used in this video. After cleaning, I like to spray with non-stick spray. You can also dust the pan with flour so the bread comes out easily after baking. After preparing my pans, I'm going to go ahead and roll the dough. Start by flattening the dough and then press the dough with the bottom of your palm and then roll and pinch. And you want to make sure you roll the dough really tight by pinching with your knuckle so the bread doesn't have huge holes when it's baked. When you get to the edge, pinch the edge of the dough to the main dough to seal and then roll. Repeat this process with the remaining dough. This is a different view just so you can see it better. Roll so you can seal it properly. Next, I'm going to drizzle a bit of oil on the dough. The oil is going to prevent the dough from drying out while it rises for the second time. Transfer the rolled up dough to the pan. The second rise usually doesn't take as much time. Just place it back in a slightly warm environment. If you have a proof setting in your oven, that works perfectly. If not, just place it in the turned off oven and allow it rise for about 40 to 60 minutes. When the dough is about 90% to the top of the pan, start to preheat your oven to get ready for baking. When the oven gets to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, place your bread in and bake for 30 minutes. If before 30 minutes you notice that the top starts to get too brown, you can cover with foil paper just to reduce the browning process. After about 30 minutes, the bread should be ready. Gently take it out of the pan. Make sure you don't press it too much because the bread is going to be really soft. If you like your bread super brown, you can leave it in the oven for an additional 3 to 5 minutes to get it brown and toasty. You'll notice a few minutes after taking your bread out, the top will start to get a bit crinkly and bumpy. That's perfectly fine. It's just because of the temperature change. To prevent that, you can leave the bread in the pan for a few more minutes inside the turned off oven just to get the top a bit harder and more crusty. Allow the bread rest for just a few minutes open and then transfer to a bread bag. And this is how I make my super soft bread every week. You can enjoy this bread with almost anything. It is not particularly suited for slicing because it is on the softer side, but if you want to slice, I advise you wait for a few hours or even the next day. This bread will last for about a week at room temperature. For maximum freshness, you can store any leftover loaves in the freezer. When you're ready to eat, just take the loaf out of the freezer, allow to thaw at room temperature, and it's going to be as fresh as the day you baked it. The full recipe is going to be in the description box, so you can check that out. Let me know if you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave me a comment or send me a DM on Instagram. My Instagram name is Kiki Foodies. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next one.